I know for you Kansas City Chief fans, you guys felt like you were long suffering. You couldn't win a playoff game. Whenever opportunity seemed to strike, you guys would you were proverbially sort of Charlie Brown running up the football to kick it. And then Patrick Mahomes shows up, and you guys have won 25 out of your last 26 that he started, which is tied for the best 26-game NFL record in 50 years. You are favored to win your second straight Super Bowl. Does it feel somewhat like a dream for somebody who grew up a Kansas City Chiefs fan to suddenly find yourself in such an embarrassment of football riches here?
Yes, it does. Unequivocally, 100%. Yes. And, I tell you, Clay, I mean, growing up, I grew up in Lexington, Missouri, which is about an hour outside of Kansas City. So pretty close, right in the Kansas City media market. My dad was a college football player at a small college in Kansas, so football's kind of in the family, and I played Pee-wee from the time I was a little guy all through high school. So we love football, love sports, love the Kansas City Chiefs. And, the Montana years came when I was right at the beginning of high school. That was the previous kind of highlight. Like, I remember then it was like, oh, man, Montana, he was already a legend, of course. I thought we're going to make the Super Bowl. We got to the AFC Championship game, I think his first year, lost that game, never made it to the Super Bowl. So to finally get there and now to be on the cusp of I don't want to jinx this by talking too much about stuff like dynasty, but I'll just say what's obvious to everybody, Mahomes is clearly a generational talent. The talent around him, Kelsey on down the line is incredible. These seem like they're good men, good citizens in the community. People love them, love what they're doing, and it's just awesome all the way around.
So where will you watch? I know it's still, whatever it is, 9 days till the Super Bowl, but will you just sit at home with your family and watch the game at home? Is that kind of the typical Sunday when you have time and you can actually sit down and watch them play?
Yeah, and we will, and I'll watch with my boys. I've got 2 little boys, and we just had a baby girl, so we've got a newborn in the house now.
I saw that,
my boys are 8 and 6, and they're big football fans, big Chiefs fans. And, we've loved watching games together last year and this year. Last year was the first year I could really get them into it where they're kind of old enough to sit through most of a game, and which was a great year for them to do it. And then this year has been awesome as well. So they're pumped about the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. We watched the AFC Championship together. So I'm looking forward to it. It'll be a great memory for me with them.
How are you sleeping, by the way? Because you kind of got through the weeds if you have an 8 and a 6-year-old, and then you go back in with a newborn. We did something similar. I've got a 12, a 10, and a 6. So we were in pretty good shape, and then, boom, we bring a new baby into the house. How's that going?
It's been interesting. I tell you, it has made me feel a lot older. I said to my wife, Erin, when we the second day that our daughter was home, I said, man, I am a lot older than I thought I was, because I don't remember it being this hard to be up at 2 a.m. With the boys. I mean, this is just, I'm out of shape on this. I got to get back with it. So, but she's, knock on wood, she's a pretty good sleeper. And it's a delight to have a newborn and to get to relive that. And my kids are old enough, and you've experienced it with your 2 older ones. When they're of that age, they kind of live through the magic of the newborn with you. And with 2 boys, I mean, that's just hilarious. So every day brings some new hilarity. So it's great. We're blessed.
We're talking to Senator Josh Hawley. You can certainly follow him on Twitter. You can watch him as he's been fighting a lot of interesting battles, and we're going to get into that in a bit. But we're kind of leading in here through the sports universe and the sports prism. And we've talked about this before because you've had your own issues with the NBA and sort of their genuflecting at the altar of corporate wokeness, as I would say. And I didn't think this got as much attention as maybe I anticipated. As the Trump administration was going out, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo came out and said, we have determined that China is committing genocide. There are these Uyghur Muslim populations. They've actually been bragging about the genocide basically on Twitter, which is its own story. So far, it appears that the Joe Biden administration is endorsing that finding. In other words, they're not making it political. They are also saying it's genocide. Yet amazingly, Senator Hawley, the NBA wants to give political opinions on everything under the sun. I have yet to hear from any player, coach, executive, or owner who has said, hey, we condemn genocide, which doesn't happen that often that the United States government actually finds that genocide has been occurring. Are you surprised by the silence? And what would you say from a corporate perspective to those organizations that may well be profiting off of slave labor in China while lecturing us about American political situations here like the NBA is doing?
Yeah, it's the profits, I think, Clay, that's really problematic when it comes to the NBA situation. It's NBA corporate and the money they make out of China, which is just unbelievable, counts for a huge percentage of the NBA's profits. We've seen widespread reports that a lot of the apparel, NBA apparel, is made using slave labor, Uyghur labor, this Muslim minority that is persecuted and is the subject of genocide in China. So, I really think that I've said this over and over and over again, that the NBA here, if they want to be the corporate citizens that they say that they are, they need to stand up and it's not just a matter of like, oh, well, why are you calling on them to comment on this or that social issue? I'm not. They make a gob of money in China. They profit off of this. They ought to pledge to be slave-free. The NBA should. They should say, we're going slave-free. We'll have no profits tied to slave labor whatsoever. And we condemn the genocide in China, and we're not going to be part of it in any way, shape, or form. I think that's just their basic obligation, given their financial benefit that they get out of this deal. But so far, it's been crickets, and I have to say, I think that's pretty disappointing.
It's sounding also, because this is where we go with sort of the media that will provide a shield. It's one thing for the NBA to avoid answering questions like this. It's another thing entirely for the NBA media, which should be pointing out, and by the way, this is directly connected because of current, I guess, GM Daryl Morey, who switched teams from Houston to the East Coast, having come out and said that he supports Hong Kong democracy, and everybody in the NBA went silent. And so when anything happens in the United States that's remotely the least bit unacceptable, they talk about being on the wrong side of history and how awful it is. But we've got clearly the wrong side of history. Genocide, kind of a big deal. Certainly the wrong side of history. Slave labor, also the wrong side of history. You've got the NBA profiting directly off of slave labor, according to reports out there about where their products are being made. Nobody's saying a word.
Yeah, it shows you that people, they're happy to be on the right side of money.
Yeah, and, that's well said.
Particularly these big multinational corporations. The NBA is no different in that respect from some of these other multinationals that have been happy to ship American jobs off to China and to make American workers compete against slave labor, and then to give jobs away to folks overseas in a cycle that perpetuates the slave labor and then also hurts Americans. So this, unfortunately, is a pattern. And I just say again, if you're making profit, you're making money hand over fist from slave labor, whether it's directly or indirectly, I think you've got an obligation to look at that and say, hold on a second, are we complicit here? The very least you can do is condemn it and say that this should not be going on. And then secondly, you shouldn't be aiding and abetting it in any way. And that's true of all these corporations. It's true of the NBA. It's true of these other big multinationals. This is a big problem for a lot of the biggest corporations in this country who, as you say, they love to tell Americans, like, here's what you ought to say, here's what you can't say, but don't tell us how to make our money. And, I think it's reasonable to say to them, don't endorse genocide.
This is another big story that connects to the world of sports. We haven't talked about it a lot on the program, but it has gotten a lot of attention because there are many people out there who are active in women's sports that are in disbelief about where we are. And for people out there who don't know, there are a couple of different lawsuits pending, one in Connecticut, I believe one in Idaho. In particular, in Connecticut, a lot of high school women who had been competing for state championships in track and field had an issue where biological men who identify as women, transgender runners, began to compete in Connecticut, and they won 15, I believe it was, state championships over women. They sued under Title IX, these high school girls did, and they won a ruling which said, and it's still pending and working its way through the courts, but I had a stat here for you, Senator Hawley. I know you're a big sports fan. And I'm reading from Amy Alkin and Abigail Schreier. They have written pieces most recently in the Wall Street Journal. And this is what Abigail Schreier's article said in the Wall Street Journal. The fastest female sprinter in the world is American runner Allison Felix, a woman with more gold medals than Usain Bolt. Her lifetime best for the 400-meter run is 49.26 seconds. Based on 2018 data, nearly 300 high school boys in the United States alone could beat the all-time female record for the 400-meter run. As someone who believes, and certainly most of my listeners do as well, that sports is the great meritocracy, right? If you are the best man or woman in your sport, you deserve to win. Joe Biden is now saying that transgender athletes can compete against women. This is creating a major conflict for Title IX, which is what has allowed so many female athletes to succeed. How do you reconcile those two positions, being pro-women's sports and then being pro-transgender athletes being able to identify as women and compete and beat them, because biologically, oftentimes, these men are bigger, stronger, and faster before they decide to transition to womanhood?
Yeah, I don't know if I don't know if they can be reconciled in the way that the president is trying to do it. I mean, I have to tell you, Clay, I think that the steps that he is taking on this are really radical. And the fact that he's doing it by executive order is really radical. You know, I just think it's there's no chance with an executive order. You know, that's a directive. I mean, there's no chance to have a debate. There's no chance to explore alternatives. There's no chance to say, well, okay, now hold on, but you know, maybe we set up the rules this way, or maybe we can tweak it that way. It's just a straight down directive, top down. And boy, I just think that is kind of a radical approach, especially on an issue like this one, where you've got a lot at stake, and you know, the stats that you quoted are really, really significant and eye-opening. And so I just think the way in which the president is going about this is kind of alarming, and I think it just does not leave much, if any, room to say, well, hold on now, what are the alternatives here, and how are we going to make sure that females, biological females, can continue to have every opportunity possible to compete, to win, to have a great sports experience, to go on for those who want it professionally, and so on. So, you know, I think this is the wrong approach that he's taking.
So we're talking to Senator Josh Hawley. I read your piece in the New York Post recently about cancel culture, and I think it's fascinating. I know you've got a book coming out about big tech, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. But obviously, we are living through right now a crazy time in the stock market, right? For people out there who are paying attention, individual investors are buying up shares, going head-to-head against people who might be shorting stocks. I understand some of you got your heads rolling back into your eyes. You don't find it to be that interesting because you may not be investors. But what connects these stories to me with what you're talking about is recently, as in Thursday, Robinhood, which is an investor tech platform, was not allowing people on that platform to buy stock in GameStop because they didn't believe it should be permissible. This, to me, ties in many ways with what Twitter has done when it comes to banning and shadow banning people from President Trump to others that are having, quote unquote, unacceptable opinions. Now you've got unacceptable stocks to be buying. When are the general public and Americans, regardless of their politics, going to stand up and say, wait a minute, what happened to our individual freedom, our marketplace of ideas, heck, just the straight up stock marketplace in general? How much power does big tech have, and how do we start to make it just be able to bend to the will of the American populace and understand that their power is not unlimited?
You know, it's a great question, and what I notice is that these big, giant corporate monopolies, they're all for having free speech and freedom to buy and sell, so long as they can control it. But if you want to do something that hurts their bottom line, then look what we see with GameStop. I mean, with this GameStop thing, these retail investors, these day traders, they have been subjected to more criticism and probably now regulation by the marketplace and by these big companies than the people who single-handedly crashed the entire financial system in 2008 and then got bailed out by the federal government. I mean,
that's right.
Really, the double standard here is amazing, and it's just because, I think, it's because, you know, the day traders are just individuals, And the folks, the hedge fund guys, they're like, well, wait a minute, we do this for a living. Like, you can't compete with us. So there's an incredible double standard that's all about who has the power. And you see that in the tech space more generally. These big platforms, they're all for free speech if you're speaking how they want you to speak. But if they disagree, if you threaten their bottom line, if you cause trouble for them, then they'll kick you off, silence you, throttle you down, use their algorithms against you. And I just think the bottom line, Clay, is that whatever your politics are on this, Americans believe in the First Amendment, and they also believe that power shouldn't be concentrated into the hands of just a few people, because bad things always happen when that is the case. And we're seeing that, unfortunately, right now in this country. We're seeing too much power concentrated into too few hands, particularly these big tech companies and these big corporate monopolies. And they're using that power, and that we've got to stand up to that and stop that.
You are a Supreme Court clerk. You are obviously highly educated in the fields of law. I also went to law school. I was not a Supreme Court clerk. You're far more accomplished legally in terms of scholarship by far than me. But one thing that I like about your positions, even if I don't always agree with them, is they are very much rooted, I believe, in a consistency of process, right? It seems to me that most people now, and I'll use protests for example, because I know you were in the Senate when the Capitol was stormed. People are insisting, and I agree with them, that people who break the law while protesting should be punished when they storm the Capitol. But simultaneously, all summer long, we heard, well, when you're angry enough, the law really doesn't matter as it pertained to all the protests that were going on all summer long. So my question for you is, I was one of the few people in the media who's got at least a consistent position here, which is when you break the law, you should be punished for it. You should be held up as to the fullest extent of the law as it pertains for protests. Why do you think so many people are incapable of consistency under their arguments? And the funniest part to me about this, and I shouldn't say funny, it's kind of ironically funny, I guess, is when one of your colleagues, Senator Tom Cotton, said, hey, we need to call in the Army to make sure, the National Guard, that everyone is safe in these cities and end all these protests. They fired the editor of the New York Times for even allowing that to be published on the editorial page. And then as soon as what happened on January 6th occurred, all of the military got called in, and they did exactly what Senator Cotton had argued for, but then it was directed at somebody who had different political views. This is what frustrates me the most.
Yeah, you're totally right. And I think the answer in terms of the double standard is, unfortunately, it's just politics. I mean, this goes back to people with power who favor one point of view over another. I mean, here's what the consistent line ought to be, which is that if you break the law, you're going to jail. If you riot, you're going to prison. If you hurt people, you're going to get prosecuted, and you're going to get punished to the fullest extent of the law. And I don't care what your reason is. I don't care. I don't want to hear it. I don't care if you are right wing, if you're left wing, it doesn't matter. If you are rioting, burning stuff, looting, assaulting cops, shooting them, you're going to jail. The First Amendment protects peaceful protest. And you know what? I will stand up and have stood up for the right of every person in this country to peacefully protest, no matter what they're protesting, even if I completely disagree with them. But what I will not stand up for is anybody rioting and breaking the law and engaging in criminal violence. It's not going to happen. But I just think that you see a lot of double standard, and I think it's because politically it's advantageous, unfortunately, for some people to say, well, if it's my side, or if it's sort of, folks who I agree with, then it's okay. If it's the other side, boy, they've got to be smacked down. And the answer is that peaceful protests are totally legitimate, ought to be protected, and you don't have to agree with the protesters. But mob violence of any kind, that's got to be stopped. And that's a position that I have taken. I condemned the riots all throughout the summer, including what has happened in my home state of Missouri, where the officer David Dorn was shot in cold blood and killed as part of the riot. Riots are illegal. They are criminal. They are not protected by the Constitution. But and I condemn the Capitol riots in the same way. There's no difference. Those folks who stormed the Capitol, that was criminal. That was illegal. They should go to prison and be punished to the fullest extent of the law. But the right to peacefully gather, that we've got to stand up for and protect.
They took away your book contract. I believe it was Simon and Schuster because you questioned the election results in the Senate on January 6th. I believe also your family, you mentioned that you had a newborn daughter. There were protesters who showed up at your home and also intimidated and behaved, I think, pretty much in a way that most people out there listening to us right now would consider to be a abominable manner, right? Not any way defensible. What was it like to lose your book contract? What has happened since? And why did you write the piece that you did for the New York Post about the fallout from everything that happened on January 6th?
I just think that it's important, number one, to call out what's happening in the country right now, which is an attempt to silence and to cancel people who hold different political views. On January 6th, I objected to the state of Pennsylvania's electoral votes, which triggered a debate in the United States Senate. This is under the laws of the United States and the rules of the Senate. If the House members and senators, if they say, hold on, I've got an objection when you're counting the electoral votes, then you have a debate afterwards, and then you have a vote. So I did that in order to trigger a debate about election integrity. I think we need to adopt some election reforms going forward. I think we need a commission on election reform. So that's why I objected, and that's what I did. And then I'm told, and by the way, Democrat members of Congress have done this in all of the last three elections that Republicans won in 2001, 2005, 2017. And it was their right to do so, Clay. That's totally fine. That was their right. But to now come out and have the left now say, oh, Josh, you did that. You were inciting violence by doing that. That's just false. That's just a lie. And to try to use that as an attempt to say any kind of dissent that we disagree with should be silenced, should be canceled. You shouldn't be able to publish. You shouldn't be able to have political events. We've had corporate sponsors say, I'm not going to let you have a political event at my property and so on. This is crazy. It's like, listen, you don't have to agree with me. I mean, you could look at my objection and say, Josh, I'm not with you on that. I don't agree. That's fine. But there's a big difference between saying, I take a different view from you on this, and saying, oh, you ought to be silenced, and everybody who supports you ought to be silenced and driven out of public life. I just think that's not America. That's not the Constitution. That's crazy. And I think it's incumbent upon those of us who in my case, have been elected to office and are representing the views of my constituents. I got to stand up and call that out and say, no way, man, I'm not going to be silenced. I'm not going to back down. We can disagree. That's fine. We resolve our disputes in a democratic way. But this cancel culture is out of control.
We just had Curt Schilling on this week on the show, famous pitcher, obviously, who had tremendous success with the Red Sox when they finally beat the Yankees. He was not voted into the Hall of Fame, he said, almost entirely because of his conservative political views, because he supported George W. Bush first and then on up to Donald Trump as a Republican. He said if he had never made any political commentary, he'd be in the Hall of Fame. He said if he had been a Bernie bro or an Obama supporter or a Biden supporter, he would be in. That seems to me to be fundamentally flawed, and I'm sure you would agree. Last question for you. There's talk about what's going to happen with impeachment next month. It appears that basically impeachment is dead on arrival because 45 Republicans have said they don't believe that under the Constitution, a president who is no longer seated can be impeached. That's a debatable topic, probably would go all the way to the Supreme Court itself, as I'm sure you well know, having been a Supreme Court clerk. Bigger picture here, it seems like there are some people who are in favor, Democrats and Republicans, of just saying this entire process is a charade. Let's just censure the president for his behavior and then not even have an impeachment trial. Is that a better result for the American public? How is this going to play out next month?
Well, I think the impeachment trial is the wrong way to go about this, Clay, principally because whatever you think of the former president, the Constitution is pretty clear about who can be impeached, and private citizens cannot be. And it says, the Constitution also says how the trial should go. It says the Chief Justice of the United States, John Roberts, now has to preside. That's not happening. If you look who's going to preside at this trial, it's going to be a Democrat, Patrick Leahy, a member of the Senate. So what's happening now is the Senate is just making it up, and unfortunately Democrats in the Senate are just making it up as they go along. And my argument is that's just really bad for the country, because what you don't want is, you don't want this to happen every 4 years, that the guy or gal who loses and is on the way out the door, the party that comes in is like, okay, good, now I'm going to come impeach you. I'm going to go after all your supporters. I mean, that's not America. That's not what our Constitution says. So, I think that this whole approach, I think it's unconstitutional. I think it's totally. I think it's hugely divisive. And you talk about dividing and animosity. The president has been saying, President Biden has been saying he wants to bring the country together. This is a good opportunity to do that, to say, come on, let's focus. We got some big challenges right now, like, for instance, the pandemic, like getting people back to work. Let's focus on those, and let's see if we can't come together.
I appreciate the time. I know how busy you are. We'll talk to you again when the book comes out. I look forward to reading it. That is Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri. Have a good weekend and good luck. I got money on your Kansas City Chiefs. I need them to win.